When asked which side are you on, I said, well, I don't work for Beijing. I don't work for Washington D.C. I work for the Philippines, so I'm on the side of the Philippines, and that really translates into a very simple statement of foreign policy, which is I promote the national interest.
SMNI, Truth That Matters.
Congratulations on your elections. How many months have you been in office now?
I took office, inauguration was the 1st of July.
Yeah.
So more or less 6 months. 7 months now.
How has it been? As expected, or better or worse?
Well, pretty much as expected. I have the advantage of having spent years watching my father being president. So I had a very good idea of what it entailed. Now, of course, it's different from a son watching his dad doing his job as you yourself doing that job. So it's like I'm in the same setting, but playing a different role. But at least I know I know what needs to be done, and I have a fair idea how it used to be done anyway, and so I have models that I can follow, templates that I can follow.
But in your father's time, there was no social media.
No social media. Yes, that's actually in politics, I think, all around the world, not only in the Philippines, that suddenly social media has become such an enormous force, not only in politics, but in all other walks of life. So, yes, that is the new feature.
I think maybe we could say that the world is more complex and confrontational now than back when your father was president, and more complex in the region? Yes,
because it was simpler then. For example, when you talk about foreign policy for a country like the Philippines, you choose. You were with the Americans or you were with the Soviet Union. That was still the Cold War. We were still in the midst of the Cold War. And so, yes, it was simpler then. But it's that kind of arrangement, or that kind of the spheres of influence, as we used to call them, I don't think applies anymore. However, we spoke about this in another session, and the forces that are sort of tending to push us back into this bipolar, I mean, not in a psychiatric sense, but bipolar world are quite strong. But I think most leaders and most strategists have a consensus that we should not fall back into that kind of situation where all countries have to choose which side they will be on. So when asked which side are you on, I said, well, I don't work for Beijing. I don't work for Washington D.C. I work for the Philippines, so I'm on the side of the Philippines, and that really translates into a very simple statement of foreign policy, which is I promote the national interest.
And the national interest also has led to the fact, I think you've been already in Beijing and visited President Xi Jinping. Did your father go to Beijing?
My father went to, my family has quite a history with the People's Republic, because in 1974, I was 16 years old. My mother took me with her on the first visit of Filipino delegation to China. And that was the precursor to the establishment of diplomatic relations. And so after that, we met with Zhou Enlai. We met with the Chairman Mao Tse-tung. Deng Xiaoping was number 3 then. So that's how it all began. The next year, my father brought a formal delegation, because we were unofficial with my mother. He brought a formal delegation where they set the framework for the establishment of diplomatic relations between the PRC and the Philippines.
I guess a very different China you visited now
Oh, God.
than you visited in the 1970s.
Completely, completely, and it's just absolutely remarkable what we saw in China in 1974, and what we saw, because after that there were many visits subsequent to the signing, especially of the diplomatic relations, but the rapid growth and modernization of China is just remarkable. I think everyone here is perfectly familiar with how that happened. But still, when you think of the time that it took them, for example, a place like Xiamen, when we first went to Xiamen, it was a little village. Even Guangzhou. Guangzhou was like it was a small city, and now it's you could be in any of the great Western capitals in terms of sophistication, in terms of development, in terms of wealth. It has been absolutely remarkable to watch.
Is China now your most important trading partner?
Yes, they are our largest right now. They are our largest trading partner.
And the U.S. number 2, or?
The U.S., I think, is number 3 now,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. Because especially since the pandemic, the alliances between our neighbors has become very strong. For example, the biggest contributor for foreign direct investment now is Singapore into the Philippines.
Wow.
And I think the next Japan and Korea are following on its heels. So it's very much a regional, because I think there has been a consensus amongst the Southeast Asian countries, Asia-Pacific countries, that we have to build these partnerships together. And the idea was really that because we need to encourage trade and to have these partnerships, because we are coming into an uncertain world with the post-pandemic global economy, and so those partnerships are strong. So we have been very active in ASEAN, APEC, to promote those partnerships, and that's why I think the balance in terms of trade and in terms of assistance has changed over the years.
I was quite surprised to hear that Singapore was number 1 on the FDI side, and you said second Japan and then Korea?
I think that's where we are now,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to move.
But I expected maybe China among the 3, but maybe many Chinese companies invest through Singapore.
Yes, well, they invest everywhere. I mean, you know, before the pandemic, the economic activity of China in other places, because they were with the rapid growth that they had planned for themselves, the demand for resources, mineral resources, all kinds of different resources that they cannot produce as quickly as they needed. So they've gone to other areas for their supplies. So it's been the same thing with the Philippines, especially at that period a few years back, where China was growing at 10% every year, 10 to 12%. In fact, there were years that they were saying that they were posting 12% growth. And that was the time that China was really hungry for all the different resources. Energy, for example, building materials, for example, minerals, for example. All of this was in high demand by the Chinese economy.
But it's incredible that I think now Philippines is the fastest growing of the ASEAN countries.
I think in ASEAN, I think we're still the fastest growing.
Yeah, around 7-8%. But since China is also such an important market for you, how do you explain that when China now has been growing a bit slower, that you have maintained or created such an impressive growth? Because that's not the situation in the rest of the world, because the growth has been going down.
Well, it's a deliberate effort on our part, because when we look at the alarming numbers such as debt to GDP ratios in the Philippines, although I always say we are doing better than our neighbors. The numbers is 62%. It is now. Is still very high for us. So the strategy is to have high growth rates and to pull us out of that situation. And so we've done everything. First of all, after the pandemic, or as we came on, as the pandemic has begun to subside, the main concern were jobs. And that was one of the areas. And we concentrated on the MSMEs, the micro, medium to medium scale enterprises, micro, small, medium scale enterprises, because that comprises such a large part of our economy. And it's the same in most ASEAN countries. And I think that's where the growth is coming from. So we were always very worried that of the talk that we were hearing on the forecasts on the international on the economies of different countries. And we kept hearing, especially later last year, we kept hearing about a recession that would be coming. So we kept looking very closely at our unemployment rate, which is now running at 4.1, 4.2%, and this is coming down. And in fact, our unemployment rate now is lower than it was before the pandemic. So we estimate that we have created about 2 million jobs since then. So as long as in my theory, my belief, and I think I'm right in that, is that as long as the unemployment rate stays low, then the recessionary forces are something that we can resist. And so that's why I think that gives a good foundation for growth. But
what are the key growth areas?
Well, we have. Let me talk about the areas that did well during the lockdowns, the strict lockdowns in the pandemic, the past 2 years. One of the businesses that was business processing, the BPOs, that kept going simply because of the nature of the technology. People could work from home. The other area that has been very active and continues to grow is mining. That side of that part of the economy. We have been a traditional exporter, manufacturer and exporter of semiconductor products, of chips, and that continues to be an important factor. But the Philippines also has a very specific advantage in that we have approximately 10 million, maybe more, overseas workers that are working all over the world and who remit to their families, so that who remit money to their families. And that has been, in the times of real difficulty for the economy, that has really been a buffer for us. The remittances now comprise about 9% already of what the government is using to fuel this growth.
You also have 7 decades long agreement with the U.S. on security. Is that something that you want to keep?
Oh, it's probably, I would say, it'd be not even more than 7 decades. It's been over a century in different guises. So that has evolved in very many ways. I mean, we started off as a Commonwealth of the United States earlier in the 20th century, and then further on, we've gained liberation after the war, after the Second World War, 1945. But the connection between the Philippines and the United States has remained strong, and we are their only treaty partner in Asia. And so that has grown stronger and stronger. But it has to, I always say that the only way for it to remain strong and to remain relevant is to evolve that relationship. So it can no longer be simply what it was before. And the Philippines has changed, the United States has changed, the world has changed, and now we are living within the context of all of these other forces that are coming out especially around the region, around South China Sea. So again, to be able to respond properly, we have to evolve these relationships. And I have to say that it continues to go. We are progressing along that evolution very well. And we are able to continue not only in terms of trade and in terms of diplomatic relationship, but beyond that we have security arrangements with the United States, and that has come to the forefront. Whereas perhaps we were a bit on the back burner for a little while, that has again come to the forefront because of the increased tensions in our part of the world.
Yeah, and you mentioned the South China Sea. Is that something that keeps you up at night? The South China Sea situation, yes. Is that something that keeps you up at night?
Keeps you up at night, it keeps you up in the day, keeps you up most of the time. It's something, it's very dynamic. It's constantly in flux. So you have to pay attention to it and to make sure that you are at least aware of the present situation, so that you are able to respond properly. So it's well, we in terms of, let's say, cross-strait tensions, we're at the very front line. We are at the very front line, and so whenever these tensions increase, when the ships come out, the Chinese send their Coast Guard vessels, the Americans answer. We are watching as bystanders, and said if something goes wrong here, we are going to suffer, and that's why when asked what is your foreign policy and how would you describe it, I say it's a commitment to peace and hewing very, very close and guided very, very closely by our national interests, as I mentioned before.
Well, if I may, did the South China Sea complex come up in your conversations in Beijing with the President Xi Jinping?
There is no way to avoid it. There is no way to avoid it. We describe it I suppose in diplomatic language as one part of our relationship, but it is an important and unavoidable issue that we have to ventilate, and we cannot sort of sweep it under the rug and pretend it's not happening, because there are effects not only in the diplomatic sense, not only in the security sense, but even in the livelihood of our citizens. So it is unavoidable to speak about that, and I would not be doing my job if I did not bring up these issues with President Xi when I had the opportunity.